Welcome to Talaterra, a podcast about freelance educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. Who are these educators? What do they do? Join me, and let's find out together. This is your host, Tania Marien. Today, my guest is Rayma Peterson. Rayma is a botanist, a botanical artist known for her habitat and landscape paintings, and the author of the new book titled Very Fine Art Projects for Artists and Educators. Rayma's new book includes 29 fine art projects that do not require complicated or expensive supplies. This makes these projects perfect for classroom teachers, educators working in informal learning environments, and parents leading homeschool programs. Why did Rayma create this book of projects? How did she establish herself as a freelance artist and educator? How does she hope to guide people's understanding of the outdoors with her upcoming books? Let's find out. Rayma, thank you so much for stopping by to be on the show today. It's a thrill to finally be able to speak with you in person for a nice chat. We've emailed each other on and off throughout the years. It's very nice to be able to sit down and speak with you in person.
Well, I feel the same way. Thank you very much for asking me.
I have admired your work from a distance for many years. Your work is in the book Today's Botanical Artist, which was the first book about the botanical artists in North America.
Right.
And as far as I know, it is still to date the only book about botanical artists from North America.
That sounds about right. I don't know of any other newer ones.
Yeah. And so, so that goes back many, many years that I've been observing your work and enjoying your work.
Well, thank you.
You've recently wrote a book, and we're here to talk about your book and also talk about your career as a freelance artist and educator, and also about your interest and your passion in documenting the native plants of Alberta. So we're going to talk about lots of different wonderful things. So I finally get to sit and chat with you. You have this extensive body of work that is linked with nature, that involves nature. So I would like to begin our conversation with this question. What is your first memory of enjoying nature?
When I was very small and started kindergarten, we lived in the St. Louis area. And I would walk to school through a very little old lady's garden, along her paths, zigzagging, so not to step on anything. And she let us do this. And we went past apple trees and chestnut trees. And then we walked under the railroad tracks through a little woodsy area. And then my school was right there. So I'll always remember walking through her garden. And she was actually disabled, and she'd be in her garden once in a while, like just laying down, weeding, and I'll never forget that. And she didn't scold or tell us to leave her garden. She let us walk through because she knew we weren't bothering anything. And then we'd go through the tunnel. It was just a pathway and through a tiny little woodsy area, which is now, there's a big superhighway going that way along the railroad tracks. So I remember the garden, and I remember looking at things like caterpillars after I got through the tunnel and on the way to school. And I'd be late for school. And so my teacher was working with me on that one. And my mom said, well, you have to stop looking at these caterpillars on the way. And so that was my earliest. And then My father was a doctor and a real outdoorsman, and my mother was an artist. And mom actually graduated from Art Institute of Chicago. So we kind of grew up with watercolor brushes in our hands. Dad was very much into camping and going to the mountains, and we were in the Midwest. Part of my childhood was in St. Louis area, and then from grade 5 on till graduation, we were in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. So our trips, we were able to go to the mountains and go camping and hiking. And this was just incredible for us little Midwestern kids to see the Rockies. And I kind of imprinted on Glacier National Park because we went there a couple of times and stayed 2 weeks and then 4 weeks one time. So this is my first backpacking, first hiking. And I was going to tell you that we took my first backpack trip. All I had to carry was my sleeping bag, and all my little brother had to carry was water, and my dad carried the rest. And we went from Many Glacier to Granite Park Chalets over a mountain pass. And when we went over that pass and saw a whole new world of snow-capped mountains, I just couldn't believe how incredible that was and to have that experience. So I was totally in love with the mountains after that.
That sounds wonderful. And that you grew up with watercolor brushes in your hand sounds so appropriate to, and it's so evident in your work. So, when did nature become important to you?
It came upon me more gradually. Like I say, when we were in Glacier, we stayed for quite a while. And Dad took my little brother hiking one time, I guess to do some male bonding or something. And I was left with my mom and my little sister. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do today? And I went in the woods, and it's dry woods. It's east slopes of the Rockies, like here. We found little tiny alder cones and lichens and little twigs. And I made little place cards with them. I glued them. Mom always had us doing crafts. So that was really, really fun. I had never seen anything like those from where I grew up. And then on a hillside outside the park, we saw, just walked up from the car and saw these beautiful Phacelia flowers, which of course don't grow anywhere in the Midwest that I know of. And I was just so enchanted by all this. So, plus I had the experience with Girl Scout camping. I even spent a summer in Colorado being a Girl Scout camp counselor after my first year of university. And then I had been in art for 2 years in university, and I was really disenchanted with how they were teaching it and forcing us into, some of the professors would force you into their own mold. And so I left art school. There were some really good professors too, but I didn't like being forced into someone's mold. So I was out of school for about a year, and then I had artist friends in Seattle. I was living there, and my really good friend Melinda had uh, shelves of houseplants in her windows. And I was totally enchanted by all the different shapes and forms, which I hadn't seen before. Because when I was growing up, most of my ideas about plants were just, there was just grass, trees, petunias, and geraniums. And couldn't get interested in that. So there were lots of stepping stones on the way for me to make a real commitment to botany. And then I went back to school and I did a botany degree here at University of Alberta.
So, science and art has been very much a part of is very much a part of your history.
Very much so. And my dad was a bird watcher, so that was his interest. And
Mm-hmm.
I know there are incredible plants in the Midwest, but I just didn't see them when I was growing up there. I just mostly saw the suburbs.
So when did you begin your career as an independent artist and educator? Did you do something else after school or did you go straight in that direction?
Well, I ended up getting a Bachelor of Education degree after botany. I decided not to go into graduate school, and I decided to go ahead with teaching because I felt it was a very flexible job. I could go anywhere with it, to a small town or to a big city, and I was really interested in living out in the country by then. So I finished up my education degree, and I was married, and my husband was teaching. I'd started teaching school in Claresholm, Alberta, and then we started our family, and I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. So I did that, and we had two children. I have a daughter and a son. Then we moved to Barrhead, and he started teaching for the Alberta Distance Learning Center. And I was pregnant with my little boy, and a friend from who was involved with distance learning got me involved with the Barrhead Art Club. And we had a really good teacher, and she really got me producing. So I started exhibiting and showing with the Barrhead Art Club. And for a small town, it is quite a wonderful art club. It's northwest of Edmonton, about an hour. Then I started to volunteer in my children's classes once a year, teaching art for one lesson for each child each year. And then parents started asking me to teach their children. And then the teachers started asking me to do professional development workshops. So I taught at the swimming pool. They had a special room for you to give classes in, and that's where I started teaching. And then I started subbing, substitute teaching, and doing conferences and professional development workshops, along with my after school art classes. So that kind of just started to grow. And I gave classes at the University Botanic Garden for adults and for children in the summer. I've taught master gardeners, and I started marking lessons for Alberta Distance Learning. A few years ago, I got to write and illustrate a whole Art 30 course, which is like grade 12, seniors in high school. So I've taught at every level. And then I even got to teach a course at University of Alberta to student teachers. So it's grown and changed. I've always had a lot of work, and now I'm in the stage of my life where I want to write about it and document things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this book that you've just published is part of that process, part of that documentation process.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Well, we'll get to that because it is a wonderful book. So you've had a gradual progression in your career from volunteering to teaching kids to then doing professional development workshops for teachers and subbing and doing conferences and then being able to expand your classes into different venues.
Yes.
Yeah, and even distance learning as well, which is fantastic, which is the way forward now.
Yes. Right now. Yeah. Yeah, that was something I really enjoyed, was developing that course.
Mhm. And do you still teach that today? I mean, is that something that you would still teach today?
No, I've retired from Alberta Distance Learning. It is still being used. And I have to say, it's one of maybe the only art course for grade 12 students that fits all of the objectives of the curriculum that was set out for grade 12 here in Alberta. And so it's been translated into French for the French immersion schools. And it's really nice to know that I've been able to contribute that way.
Oh, yeah, that is wonderful. Yeah, what a legacy. That's a huge contribution.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So during your very, very, very busy career, you began to document the native plants of Alberta. What prompted you to do this?
Well, when I was still a student in botany, I went on a big field trip out to Catamount area in Alberta. And that is on the east slopes of the Rockies, just east of Jasper National Park. And part of that area has now been made into a provincial park. So the professor and the grad student and the woman who ran the herbarium and I all went out to Catamount to botanize. It's a special area. It's got lots of rare plants. And when we went up into the alpine there, and I saw how incredibly beautiful it was and what was growing there, I just started taking pictures. I wasn't doing art right then. I took so many pictures. And I just thought this is the right field for me. All the colors of the moss and the incredible flowers like elephant's head, just amazing things that grow here in our Canadian Rockies. And it just grew from there. I took a trip up to Inuvik when my husband was doing field work up there, which is on the Arctic Ocean. Well, it's almost on the Arctic Ocean. It's in the Mackenzie River Delta. And I saw the tundra and what a rich tapestry the tundra is. So on all of our trips, we always botanized, and I just saw more and more. And I love to see them in their native habitats. The thing with a lot of botanical art is that it's a plant portrait on a white background. And I wanted to show plant communities. So it's still very scientific, but I think some of the botanical artists don't really accept what I'm doing because they all want the plant portrait on the white background. But I feel like my work is value added with plant communities and the plants that it's growing with, what kind of substrate it's growing on.
I agree, and that is what makes your work stand out for me. I'm drawn into your paintings because it's a habitat scene. It's like Durer's habitat, right?
Right.
His
That he was the first ecological artist, as far as I know. So I actually have a print of the great piece of turf hanging up on the wall, and I keep going, okay, just if I get criticized, they go, look at Durer. He was incredible, and he was doing this. And there are not very many of us who are doing this with showing the habitat.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful. And your paintings have all the right amount of detail so that you know what you're looking at, what the landscape is like. All that information is there.
I usually try to write up like a little text panel for each painting that tells what the plants are, their scientific names, and whereabouts they're growing. I don't try to belabor the whole thing, but I want people to know it's a story. It's a story, and it's educational, if I can use that word.
Yes, no, absolutely. It is absolutely educational. As you worked on your project of documenting the plants, did you form any partnerships along the way?
I don't know if I would say that so much. I have worked with different organizations, like with the George Pig Historic Garden, which is near to where we lived up near Barhead. Um, I did interpretive signage for them, and that was volunteer work. I was quite involved with them. He was quite an amazing botanical historical figure here in Alberta. I also worked a bit with University Botanic Garden and did some paid work for them with their magazine and their some interpretive signs. And I also, as a volunteer, organized botanical art shows there for 4 years. So, yeah, it's just I have to kind of try to keep in touch with the scientific community as well as the artistic community to get these kind of jobs.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah, because botanical art, natural history art, scientific illustration, it is that delicate blend of art and science, right? It's science communication, but it's also showing a different perspective of your natural landscape.
Right, right.
When did the idea of writing your book take place?
Oh boy, quite a few years ago. I worked on it for over 25 years.
Oh my goodness.
And I just decided I felt like I had something to offer the educational community, the art education community. Because I wasn't an in-house teacher or on-campus teacher, I've had to develop a lot on my own and promote it on my own. One of the groups I taught for very happily uh, as well was the city of St. Albert. And we have beautiful studios here at City Hall where artists taught. And I had a lot of support from the administrator there. So I also kept thinking about all the wonderful influences I had and giving back. My mom had this wonderful teacher in Milwaukee who was so multimedia. And even though I never took any classes with her, mom did all these different types of mixed media things, mosaics and weaving. And mom, of course, did the watercolors, but there was silver and, try new things, stitching, embroidery, all different things. And so I wanted to give her credit as well, because some people just get blinders on when they do art and just stick with one particular thing. But with children and with students, I try to inspire them with what is possible with all these different media.
Yep. And I can tell you that inspire is what you do through your book.
Oh, thank you.
Your book was self-published. So what was that process like for you?
Well, it was funny. Like, I kept thinking all through the years that I was writing up the lessons and doing all the samples that, oh, am I going to have to pay a publisher to publish this? Oh, what are they going to do to it? Are they going to tear it to pieces and modify it? And so I kept hesitating through all these years with going ahead with publishing. And I have a very nice friend, Linda Kershaw, who has published quite a bit with Lone Pine. And then she had done some self-publishing with another author, Lorna Allen, for the Vascular Plants of Alberta, which has just come out. And she knew enough about publishing that she decided to go ahead and self-publish. So that really encouraged me that I could actually do that and not have to sit through months and years of waiting for a publisher, that I could have a lot of control over what, I could have ultimate control really over what was going to go in the book. And so maybe if she hadn't done her books by self-publishing, I might not have had the courage, because it's a steep learning curve. And I also had a glitch when I had to upgrade my computer. And then I found out that my Adobe programs weren't going to work on the upgraded computer. So I had to subscribe, which I was worried because it's not cheap. And but I thought, I really want to finish this. I want to get it up. I want to get it out there. And so I uploaded it probably about 6 or 7 times before it actually worked. But I was so thrilled once it finally worked. And yeah, it's just been quite a journey.
I can imagine. How did you decide? You have this extensive career in teaching and in art instruction and in the sciences. How did you decide what to include in this book?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I really wanted to include like a mini course in drawing, because a lot of teachers are really scared to try to draw and draw in front of their students or teach them to draw. And I was artistic and I was creative when I was young, but I couldn't draw well. And it took going to university and really taking courses to learn how to draw. So that's the very first section of the book is on drawing, and it is almost like a little mini course in drawing. And I really wish I had learned all those things a lot earlier in my life. So even if you're a scared stiff teacher, you could use those lessons to help your students. And actually, if you're a scared stiff artist who doesn't feel comfortable with drawing, I'm hoping that my lessons will help you feel more comfortable with it.
I've read every lesson in your book, and the instructions are written so clearly, and it's not intimidating at all. How do you want your book to be used? You wrote it for artists and educators, but how would you like it to be used?
I'd like it to be used as a resource in schools and for artists, for adult artists. The lessons are appropriate for all ages, and they're accessible and usable for even kindergarten. Some of them, like the monotype prints and the tissue paper collage. Every student approaches these lessons from their own level of experience. So I would just like to encourage people of any age who want to grow and learn.
You explain in the preface that included in this book are lessons about the elements of that include the elements of art and design. So the elements of art are line, shape, value, color, texture, and form. And the principles of design you discuss are balance, harmony, repetition, proportion, variety, rhythm and movement, contrast, dominance, and unity. And so your book, and through your different activities, touches upon these different elements. Plus, it's is wonderful selection of mixed media projects. It isn't just drawing alone. It isn't watercolor alone. I mean, it's a lot of fun, a whole lot of fun.
Yes, I really have had a lot of fun over the years teaching these things. And there are some projects that the students just love, and adults and children.
On the first page of your book, you acknowledge that your research and your classes were taught in the traditional territories of many Western First Nations. I was moved that this page comes before even the official title page of your book. Why did you feel it was important to put this land acknowledgement on this page instead of, say, in the preface?
I've been looking at some of the books that are being published now in Canada. And also, if you go to a concert here in Canada, there are lots of places that the first things that they say is, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 land. And they tell the nations, and they tell the Métis people that live there. And to me, it's just a gesture of respect and appreciation. That's where most of the authors seem to be putting this kind of acknowledgement, is right at the very beginning. And I thought to put it along with the dedication to my children would be useful right at the beginning.
Can you explain what the Treaty 6 territory is?
Treaty 6 territory, I hope I get this right, it's the middle of Alberta. There's Treaty 6, 7, and 8, I think, in Alberta. And my daughter knows a lot more about it because she's worked in environment and with Indigenous peoples here. So I had her help me actually draft that to make sure it was respectful and appreciative. And I really appreciate Indigenous arts too, as you might be able to tell from some of the other lessons that are in the book.
Yes, you include in this book art projects reflecting different cultures. So we have the Inuit people project from Panama, reflective of Panamanian culture, Polish folk tales, and the clay project in here. That looks like fun.
You don't actually have to have earth clay to do it. You can use the cornstarch recipe I've included. But there are some schools where clay is an option. And yeah, I taught quite a bit of clay classes for a while. So, and they were geared for children. And so this was one of my own that I adapted from wood sculptures that I had seen in Santa Fe.
And you also have a project centered around Ukrainian churches and African story cloths and Egyptian paper projects. And then a nice selection of references at the back of the book. Like I said, it's an accessible book, a lot of rich, different materials. Anybody, teacher, parent, or even older kids can start any of these projects on their own. And then those materials are things that you have, with the exception of the paint, the occasional paint, the tube of paint for this, that, and the other. The glue, the Q-tips, everything. It's very accessible.
Well, and tissue paper is in most schools, colored tissue paper, and the students absolutely love working with it. You get instant beauty with it. And all you need is the colored tissue paper, the white glue and water, and old brushes, and a sturdy piece of paper. And it's the basis for many, many art lessons you can do. So I wanted to make sure I included that. It's so much fun. And like I say, anybody of any level can do it.
So you mentioned that you want to start documenting your experiences and your processes, and that this book, Very Fine Art Projects for Artists and Educators, was your first book along these lines. So this is your first product in wanting to document everything that you've done. What's next for you?
There's a couple of things I really want to do. The first one, I think, has to be a book documenting my own work. And I do that with every painting. I take photos and digital photos. I write up a bit of text. And it's very handy when you're going to apply for an exhibition. You have it all ready to go. So I would like to do kind of a chronological, not sure how it'll turn out yet, but I think chronology plus my different travels. I'd like to include some of those in there, as well as Western Canada and Alberta, because I've been to New England and Oregon to visit friends, and then we go out and botanize and look at plants, and they take me around, which is wonderful, and I don't want to forget any of that. And once I get finished with that, which is probably going to take me the rest of my life, I would like to I'd like to do a botanical activity book for children with puzzles and mazes and dot to dot and all the kinds of things that are in workbooks that kids really, really like. And that my purpose behind that is to educate people more about plants. Now, I approached a publisher about this and they said, well, it's not whales and it's not wolves, so it won't sell. But I'm going, okay, now I know about self-publishing. And I think that there are nature centers that could be interested. They're like your local greenhouse or botanic garden. I'm hoping that there will be some kind of a market for that. But I honestly don't know. I hope that one day I'll get to that.
Yeah. No, I think there is an audience for that. And in earlier conversations that we've had, you've mentioned that plant blindness, the issue of plant blindness, was one of the issues that motivates you to do the work that you do. What do you feel is not understood about the botanical world? You just mentioned that the publisher told you, well, if it's not an animal, effectively, it's not going to sell. So what do you think people need to know about plants?
I think they need to know about how interrelated we are, how interrelated all the plant and animals are in the natural communities. In Alberta, we have part of the science curriculum is to study wetlands 1 year. But the only thing that I remember in my science from school was when I took biology in grade 9, and we learned how to grow beans and learned about the difference between flowering plants and ferns and their life cycles. And that was all we learned about plants. And now I think I don't know if they're even doing that. I'm not that familiar with what they're doing in the high school. I just think that in schools, there needs to be a lot more about plants and how dependent we are on them, how much richness they give our lives and our survival.
Of all that you've observed in your career and all the experiences that you've had and all the conversations you've had with other artists and with other teachers, what do you feel is missing in the conversations about botany education?
It just isn't there. In schools, it's not there. And I think back in England, where I think our educational tradition comes from, Europe and England, they used to teach drawing. They used to teach about plants in the area where people lived. And all that's gone by the wayside. So I think it's really important that students have pencils and brushes in their hands instead of all this emphasis on computers. I know that it's very important, that technology is very important, but I think these other things are really being left behind. And it's important for our mental health as well to be connected to our environment.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel pencils and brushes do that computers can't?
Oh, they connect you. You can have direct observation. They're very important for accurate observation of your environment, of creatures and objects in the environment. They're hands-on. I know that we're translating something concrete into something abstract with pencils and brushes, but with a computer, it's even one more step removed from that.
How do you hope to guide people's awareness with your future books?
I would like, especially people here in Canada, but in all over the world, to become more aware of plant communities and how absolutely incredibly rich and colorful they are, to want to preserve them, to work to preserve them, to hopefully change attitudes about us so-called environmentalists, that we're not just kooks or left-wing pot-smoking anarchists, as one of our government members called environmentalists, that this is important. It's important for our lives and our survival on this earth. So I just want to expand how people look at things, how they look at the natural world, and to get interested in the natural world.
Yeah, well, I look forward to your next book, Rayma. Oh. And then you come back. Please come back, and we will discuss your next book, because your paintings and your habitat scenes that you create, that's an entirely different conversation. That's definitely a part 2.
Yeah, this book is the Very Fine Art Project is more for a general art education audience and artists, and I really wanted to accomplish that as an educator, but now it's time to work more on my own work and get that out there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it'll be a treat, and so I will look forward to having you back. You have an open invitation, Rayma, anytime.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It's really been great, and I appreciate the opportunity to get the message out there.
To learn more about Rayma, how you can purchase her new book, and to view links to resources relevant to this episode, please visit the show notes. Talaterra is a podcast for and about independent educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tania Marien.